Welcome to part 2 of our look at early thought and culture, and a look at animism, shamanism, and Buddhism in the early period. So we're looking now at the introduction of Buddhism to Korea during the Three Kingdoms period. So Koguryo was the first, and in 372 Koguryo officially was recognized by or the rulers officially recognized Buddhism. And then Baekje in 384 followed. And Shilla was the last to officially recognize, to have its rulers officially recognize Buddhism. And you can see that there's quite a bit of a disparity in time. This is partly because Shilla was the most isolated of the three kingdoms. Koguryo, having no natural land barriers here, we do see that there's quite a bit of interaction between whatever is up here and with Koguryo. Baekje was known to have quite a bit of interaction with whatever was in the southern part of the mainland of China. And then also they were instrumental in transmitting Buddhist thought to Japan because of their relations with Japan. So we see that Buddhism is officially recognized by rulers of the three kingdoms fairly early on. Now, why would the state support Buddhism? Why would they go through the trouble of doing this and not only importing, but then officially recognizing a foreign religion? Well, there are certain benefits to doing this, and it's important for us to understand as well that because Buddhism was the intellectual currency of the time, in terms of scholarship, culture, philosophy, the arts, it was really Buddhism that dominated at the time. And you have various monks and students that are traveling over to China, trying to study and to learn more. And so there's quite a bit of a scholarly exchange there. You have same either going into India or from India. And so this is the intellectual currency of the time and becomes extremely influential. And in order to participate in this larger civilization, then it becomes important to also participate in the discourse. And so, excuse me, this is what we see happening. There are also many benefits for rulers, right? The idea that I'm the king because I must have done something good in the previous life. So this is why I was born the king. Justifies my rule, justifies my legitimacy. The idea that the king can call upon Buddhist deities for protection. So if we as Koguryo, or we as Baekje, as a state, we officially support Buddhism, then maybe we will be blessed and we will prosper as a result of this. So there are many reasons why we see state support of Buddhism. And really what comes out of this is just an amazing array of different artwork. This is a bronze statue of the pensive Bodhisattva that is a national treasure here in Korea and is at the National Museum. There were during the Picture time period, there was temples, royal temples to Maitreya. So on the palace grounds, we see that these temples were built, and if you look at the structure of these temples, we see that it's very similar to the temples that were built in Nara, Japan. And again, this is because Picture was instrumental in the transmission of Buddhism from Korea to Japan. As we saw in this picture here, this bronze statue, in a temple in Kyoto, there is this exact same statue, but this one is carved out of wood. So it's not bronze, but it's carved out of wood. For many, many years, art historians had said that this is the same artisan and that this is of Korean provenance. The Japanese authorities had said, we don't know the provenance, it is not clear, but maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, the Japanese government finally acknowledged that yes, it is of Korean provenance. So this was kind of big news in both Japan and Korea. All right, so what we see happening as Buddhism is introduced into Korea, we see a fusion of shamanism and Buddhism. So whereas in Korea, mountain gods were very, very prevalent in shamanistic beliefs, these mountain gods eventually turn into bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are in the Buddhist belief, they are entities that have achieved enlightenment, but they choose to stay behind. They don't go to nirvana, but they stay behind in order to help others also achieve enlightenments. And so mountain gods then kind of evolve into bodhisattvas in Korea. There's also the adoption of dragon worship, the 7 stars, as I had mentioned, and the king also depicts himself as a kind of bodhisattva. So we see this fusion of shamanism and Buddhism. Now, when we look at the history of Buddhism in Korea, it had come to Korea. One of the most famous monks is Wonhyo, who had brought Pure Land chanting and flower garlands, sutra-based Buddhism to Korea. But he is well known for having reached enlightenment without having to leave Korea. So until this time, many Buddhist monks would travel from Korea to China, where they would receive enlightenment after meticulous studying and discipline. But he is the first to have achieved enlightenment in Korea. Another famous monk is Chajang, who brought Buddhist relics back from China. And so what we see developing is after the Three Kingdoms period and Shilla unified the peninsula, we see different types of schools developing, different types of Buddhist schools, and these are schools that cater to the elite culture of Shilla. So, for example, there's the Flower Garland School, and this school entails 52 stages to enlightenment. Very complicated, very time-consuming, and this was very popular among aristocrats. Why? Because they have the time, they have the resources to devote themselves to these 52 stages of enlightenment. So again, what we see is this kind of syncretism, a kind of adaptation of Buddhism to the local culture and the local context. So we see just these amazing works of art that are produced as a result of Buddhist faith. Puruguksa is a a temple down in Gyeongju, the former capital of Shilla. It is still operational, and it really is magnificent. If you get a chance to go down there, I would highly recommend that you visit Purguksa. Here's an aerial shot. All right, so Buddhism in the state, it was again supported by the state because it was believed to protect the throne, but also because when we get later into Korea in the medieval period, so during the Goryeo dynasty, there are government-run clerical exams that are organized and categorized by the government. And because we have these exams, the government starts promoting the printing of Buddhist texts. In fact, the first book ever printed with movable metal type was a Goryeo Buddhist text. Gutenberg had until recently been credited with the first to invent movable metal type, but in fact it was in the Goryeo dynasty where we see this occurring. So the Goryeo Tripitaka is the most complete collection of the Mahayana texts, and there are over 81,000 woodblocks. And so we see this proliferation of the publication of texts as a result during this time. And then we also have during Goryeo the development of what is called Sun Buddhism. This is called Chan Buddhism in China or Zen Buddhism in Japan. This is a meditational Buddhism, and it was very popular among the military leaders of Goryeo. Now, if the military leaders are supporting it and practicing it, this is going to become popular at the time. Why? Because if you remember that at some point during the Goryeo dynasty, there is a conflict and a power struggle between the military and the civil officials. The military officials take over, they purge the civil officials, and we have a period of military rule led by the Che household. So when you have these military leaders that are supporting and sponsoring meditational Buddhism or Sun Buddhism, it's not surprising that it's going to become widespread and very popular. So Buddhism becomes promoted and sponsored by the Goryeo nobility. There are different reasons for this. One is, just based on belief that if you devote your resources to the support and promotion of Buddhism and the Buddhist faith, that then maybe you will be reincarnated in a better life in the next life. There's also for practical reasons. So if you donate a part of your land to the Buddhist temple, that land becomes tax-free. So that's less taxes that you're paying to the government. And we all know that even in modern times today, the very wealthy will look for these similar kinds of loopholes in order to avoid paying higher taxes. There's also, if you remember that by the end of the Goryeo dynasty, the dynasty had like broken down, and you see the rise of these military generals, and the people are fighting with each other. The Mongols are being kicked out, and the Ming dynasty is rising. So it's a time of turbulence and instability, and so oftentimes under these kinds of circumstances, you'll see a turn towards religion as a comfort, but also the belief that, well, if we support Buddhism, then the Buddha will protect us and will defend us. So various reasons for why. This monk, Jinul, who lived in the 12th century, he rejected state-supported Buddhism. He did not like the fact that you had the royal throne and you had government officials and aristocrats that were supporting the Buddhist establishment and giving them land and giving them slaves. And he did not like this. Um, and so he actually came up with his own kind of Buddhism that fit the needs of the time and the local context. So his school of Buddhism insisted on the need for gradual cultivation after sudden enlightenment. So he believed that you could gain enlightenment, but then after that you needed to refine yourself through study after that. So this is a reconciliation of meditational and scholastic Buddhism. He introduced the use of the koan to Korea. This is a meditational device where you contemplate an issue or a problem, like what is the sound of one hand clapping. And this is supposed to discipline your mind and to help you focus. He said that the purpose of meditation was to trace the radiance back to the mind, and he is seen as the founder of the largest Korean Buddhist order today. All right, so Goryeo Buddhism really flourished, and it was sponsored by the state. These are the wood blocks of the Tripitaka, where they could print out these texts with these wood blocks. And so there are records of monks coming from different areas, either the Japanese archipelago or China or other places, that are asking for copies. And they are housed at Heiensa, which is also an operational temple. You'll often see these kinds of rocks and figures at Buddhist temples. But what you also will see is the incorporation of folk gods. So local folk gods that had been associated with shamanistic beliefs that are incorporated into the Buddhist establishment. So, for example, the hermit sage. The other is the Big Dipper god or the mountain god. In Buddhist belief, the idea is that there are 49 days between death and reincarnation. So once a person dies, mourners can go to the temple and pray for them, that they are not judged too harshly and born into a better state. And so large temples will often have a separate building for those praying for the recently deceased. So here we see praying for the dead. There's also Buddhism in geomancy, which is feng shui in Chinese or pungsu in Korean. And this is the idea that the lay of the land has influence and a certain energy or power. So some things are negative and some things are positive. Mountains are considered to be positive, have positive energy. So it's possible, if you lay out a structure in the proper way, according to geomantic principles, that you can harness that positive energy, and this will contribute to prosperity. So many Buddhist sites were chosen according to these principles, such as the placement of temple buildings and stupas. And sometimes you have things that are placed in order to block negative energy. And the late Shilla monk Dosan is said to have introduced geomancy to Korea. So this is a kind of like a science, and you had many technical bureaucrats that would study and specialize in this particular subject. All right, so we can see the fusion of Buddhism and shamanism. This is actually a shaman's shrine, but it looks like a Buddhist temple. Shamans in Korea often call what they do Buddhism. And among the many gods they interact with are Buddhist gods, such as the healing Buddha. And there are some buildings that look like they are a Buddhist temple, but they are actually a shaman shrine. So we see this very thorough integration and fusion of the two. If we look at Japan, so Zen Buddhism, this meditational Buddhism, became very popular. There is also an aspect of it that focuses on personal enlightenment and self-discipline through meditation, and this becomes popular among the samurai during the medieval period. Another version of Mahayana Buddhism that was imported from China to Japan is this Amida or Pure Land Buddhism. And this kind of Buddhism is very democratic in the sense that it teaches that all people are eligible to reach the Pure Land. And so this obviously becomes popular among the peasants during the medieval period in Japan. So again, we see that how there are these different schools of Buddhism that appeal to different classes, different populations, different types, and they adapt to these different schools of Buddhism adapt to the local context. And it's because of its adaptability that they're really able to flourish and prosper. Back to Korea, we see that before 1170, that many aristocrats would send their sons to the monasteries, and so we see this close connection between the religion and state. The Buddhist temples, as I mentioned, they were tax exempt. They received very generous donations, and so we see during the Goryeo dynasty extravagant temples that were built with thousands of slaves. Many of them had their own profit-making ventures like liquor brewing. And so why do you have such strong state support of this? Why do we have, what remains, these amazing Buddhist art pieces that remain are just a testimony to how much Buddhism flourished during the Goryeo dynasty. All kinds of paintings and sculptures and ceramics. This Goryeo celadon is renowned. So why did this occur? And we want to look at what the local context was. So at this point in the semester, you should be able to think about, okay, what were the political factors that contributed to the growth of Buddhism? What were the social factors? What were the economic factors? If we look at the Goryeo dynasty, we have, we have Wangun, who is piecing together all of these different local warlords throughout the country. Then you have the rise of civil officials, the military officials that essentially stage a coup d'etat, and then the Mongol takeover or Mongol overlordship. How does all of this affect the development and evolution of Buddhism in Korea? So I'd like you to think about those kinds of questions. And then another good example of how Buddhism just is able to constantly adapt and change to the local context is when we look at something like Won Buddhism, which is a very modern form of the Buddhist faith. So Won Buddhism, it subscribes to very mainstream notions like karma and reincarnation. It is meditative and believes that you can achieve enlightenment on your own, and that you can eliminate suffering and you can achieve enlightenment, but it is very simple, so it does not believe in all of the ornamental gold statues and very impressive artwork. It does not rely on that. And one Buddhist belief, their beliefs have become very modernized to fit modern day society. So, for example, oftentimes when you think of Buddhist monks, um, they are poor, they have no material possessions, and they might be begging on the street for food and rely on the charity of others. Well, one Buddhist believe this is not the right way. They say, no, everybody should have a job. You should be able to support yourself, because if you become a burden on your family or society, this is not a good thing. So everybody should have a job. You should work. You should be able to support yourself. Making money, that's perfectly fine, as long as you do not make that a priority, as long as making money is not the most important thing in your life. Making money is fine. Driving a nice car is fine. You know, living in a nice house is fine, as long as you understand that this is not the most important thing, and that you focus on meditation and achieving enlightenment and doing good work. So, so this is a very modern form of Buddhism that has been adapted to modern day life. All right, so this is the end of part 2 of our look at animism, shamanism, and Buddhism.